Hello and welcome back to the Cascade Subdivision. In today's short video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the operating scheme here on the Cascade Subdivision and walk through some of the paperwork that we use here during operating sessions to get trains up and over the pass. Right ahead of us here in Oak Ridge Yard are two of the helper units that we run on the layout. These are the focal point of the layout. All the other trains are secondary to these two. This is the coveted job for operators on the layout, and a lot of the schemes and paperwork revolve around them. So get ready. We're going to talk a little bit more into operating theory and some of the things that we do here. But before we get started, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel and let me get all the paperwork out, and we can talk about operating here on the Cascade Subdivision. Okay, so the first piece of paper that we use here at the Cascade Subdivision for operating sessions is the train sheet. And so I have created predetermined sequences of trains that run on the layout. And these all have to do with the locomotives and rolling stock I actually have available and their location around the layout. So it is not possible for me to run more than 3 trains in any given direction, given I only have 2 complete trains. However, because my staging yards are loops, I can essentially recycle the train. And so, for example, this quality manifest from Portland to Roseville, so that's going to run from the bottom level of the layout all the way up to the top level of the layout. Its lead unit was 2673, and then it ran again an hour or so later as or that same consist ran again as its sister train, Roseville to Portland, or again a quality or priority manifest. So all the way on the left here, these are the list of trains that are going to run during a typical session. And I have sequences of anywhere from 6 to 8 or 9 trains set up. And so just kind of plug those in based on what crew we have and what we ran last time. Moving across the sheet, this is the direction. The line runs north to south. Southbound trains go up the hill, and so they need helpers. Northbound trains come down the hill. This is a helper busy section or sequence, and so I've got 1, 2, 3, 5 of the 7 manifests were all southbound, and so sometimes I'll do that to emphasize the helper operation. And then over here we have the departure time, and so you can see during our session we ran from 2:15 to 4:30 almost, and we only got through 4 trains. There were only 2 of us, and so we only did 1 train at a time, but it's slow. You'd think 4 trains on a layout this size would take less than an hour, but when you add in helpers and some of the other things that we're going to talk about, it really takes on a more prototypical speed. So we've got the departure time. That's when the train gets clearance from dispatcher. If we have a dispatcher, we'll use that and use track warrants, which of course adds more time. When it was just 2 of us, we just kind of dispatched ourselves, and one of us, whoever wasn't the engineer of the train or actively running would act as dispatcher. Here's the crew, just the first initials. The lead unit, that's pretty all self-explanatory. Most of this is filled out as before the session, and then some of it is filled out as the session goes on. Here at fuel level, this is an interesting thing that I wanted to add, and essentially we can fuel locomotives at a few different locations on the layout. And so that is something that is typically not modeled, and I wanted to model it. And so what we do here is we roll some dice, and whatever the number of the dice rolled, we roll 2 out of 12, whatever that number is, we divide that by 3, so we get a fraction out of 4, and then that we then convert that to percentages. So 25%, 75%, 50%, 100%. You get it. Basically, if you were to roll a 3, that would be 25%. And so anything less than 50 needs to be fueled at some point during the operating session. And depending on where you request fuel with the dispatcher, that would take up anywhere from 3 to 5 minutes. It basically just delays your departure time. So a super simple way to add a little bit of realism to the layout, and an additional way to communicate with dispatcher. For example, here we had a departure time of 3:41. This was also set by DICE. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But we had fueling done before the train departed Klamath Falls, and so the departure got boomed back 5 minutes. So it just gives a little bit more of a slower pace and more realistic pace to the layout. We also had the helper units fueled in Oak Ridge, so that was a 5-minute delay as well. In terms of departure time, because trains recycle, it would basically be very easy to run the train to the top of the hill, turn it around, and get ready to run it down. Well, that's really not how real railroads operate. There's gaps between trains and whatnot. And so, again, here we roll 2 dice to determine the time between when the previous train arrived and when the next train will depart. Not for all of them. Some of them have a little bit more specified time, so we can put some meets and different things in. And it might seem a little contrived, but when you have a layout this small, it makes sense to have a train sequence and plan out some of the different things that occur during operating session, just to add some interest. To combat that, that's why we roll this dice. And so, for example, this manifest Eugene to Roseville arrived at 3:33, and we rolled the dice, got an 8, and the next train was set to depart at 3:41, and that just adds a little bit of variety. So, in addition to the master train list, I also created some consist cards, and these stick with the locomotives themselves, and kind of explain a little bit about the locomotive, just some prototypical details here, as well as some of the functions on the decoders with each locomotive, the consist number, and the locomotives in that consist. The lead locomotive is listed first, and of course, again, here are the functions, and chose the font and everything just to try and keep it consistent and within the theme of UP. And now here is the last piece of operating documentation. This is it's essentially a switch list for the local that works out of Oak Ridge for the mill, Weyerhaeuser or Pope and Talbot. And so this is based off of work order by Lance Mindheim, basically made in Excel and copied some of his notations and design and how we put it together. But it's a really easy way to basically transfer a complex manifest from Jammerai into a worksheet that helps the crews, and the crews can use this in a way that is efficient to them and what have you. So here in the first up here we have the train. This is a local and Oak Ridge, and then I just chose 580. That's the milepost at Oak Ridge. The date, and then you set your time, actual departure, locomotive, etc. Here's just the key. Put the initial or the road name of the car to be moved, the car number, the work order, so these placing them 3 places, the spot. So this is to replicate the specific spot at the industry, in this case the mill, where the mill representative wants those cars. And so this is not given on JMRI, but is put on this worksheet here. And so W1, that's the wood chip spot, and then these are just lumber loading down here. Or excuse me, that's an L. So this is a lumber. All three of these are lumber loading, and so then this allows the crew to block the train before they shove it down the spur. And then here are just some of the notes. So this is, I used when I ran this, 2 of these cars were in the off spot, which we have a couple different off spots for the mill, just to add some interest. And one of them came from this train, the Eugene Roseville manifest. So that's kind of pretty self-explanatory, but adds a little bit of interest. And then finally at the bottom, when the work is done, things have to be signed off by the crew, the Union Pacific Railroad crew that ran the train, as well as the mill representative. We'll check to make sure all the cars are in the right spot and the work was done safely and efficiently. Dispatcher, or whoever is running the trains, kind of manages that right there. And some people might be familiar with these. These are the printouts from JMRI that indicate all the different spots and everything. This is a manifest here for the Oak Ridge local, and so this lists the trains that need to be set out and picked up. And then over here, this is also another option. You can use a switch list, so it goes by train, and then it also goes by tracks, so the different tracks and what cars are where and where they will be at the end of the session. And then here's a similar switch list for Oak Ridge. This also is included with the work order, just so you just tuck this under here like that, just so crews have another option when they are working with their train, just to see and check the various things that they need to do during a given session. Let's talk about a few more things, and then that will be it in terms of an overview of some of the operation things we do here. I think the last thing to talk about would be the helper locomotives here in Oak Ridge. And so most southbound trains head up the hill, and with the design of the layout, most trains have 2 locomotives on the front and anywhere from 15 to 20 cars in the train itself. I know that doesn't sound like a lot for a modern railroad, but with the different scenes here and all the curves, it really seems a lot longer of a train. And that number of cars will actually stall out a locomotive as they head up the train. All of my freight cars, or most of my freight cars, are super weighted, so I've added anywhere from 4 to 5 ounces of weight to those cars, and of course replaced the couplers with metal couplers to help with that, as well as on the locomotives as well. So everything has metal couplers, everything has a little bit extra weight, and what that allows us to do is have prototypical helper operations and replicate the horsepower that is needed to get these trains up and over the pass. And so, like I said, southbound trains heading over the hill will add helpers. The dispatcher and train crews kind of work together as to where to add those helpers. Most times it can be done here in Oak Ridge. Sometimes it can be done down in West Fir. It just depends on the scenario and what the dispatcher needs to do and where the helper crews are at and timing and everything. So that is one other thing to kind of makes me think of. We also have a crew change, so we can determine if we want to run a 2, a 3, or a 4-hour session. In a 2-hour session, there's no crew change. We don't have to worry about engineers or helper crews or locomotive crews timing out. In a 3-hour session, at the beginning of the 3rd hour, so after 2 hours, there is a crew change. And so as much as possible, we'll try to get the helpers and the local here into Oak Ridge switch out with the local crews, and we will delay the departure of any trains coming out of Eugene or Klamath Falls to make sure that those crews do not exceed their time allotted. And then, of course, in a 4-hour session, we would still switch after that second hour, just to mix things up. This layout, speaking of crew, can be operated with 2 people, which is perfect. It's a very immersive and busy experience for 2 people. If we add a third, that person can slot into either running the local while the 2 others run the main line, or that person could slot into dispatcher, or if I'm around, sometimes I'll operate as a train master, and so basically determine what trains coming in and out of staging and help align tracks and move things around at staging, as well as help organize some of the paperwork and determine some of the things that we talked about, like fuel levels and crew changes and arrival and departure times, different things like that, to help the layout run a little bit more smooth and allow crews to focus on running the trains and not some of the other things that we do to add interest. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to put in the comments any questions or comments or complaints or concerns or criticisms or whatever you might feel about operating here on the Cascade Sub. Feel free to put that in the comment section below. It's great to get some conversation going about the things that we do and things that other people do. In no way am I trying to convey to you that this is the only way to do it. This is just works best for what I've got here and the thing that I'm trying to convey to visitors and operators, and that's helper operations and a little bit slower pace. So these things work for me. They may not necessarily work for you, but I hope you enjoyed the video and a little bit of an overview of what we do here at the Cascade Sub for operating.